The evening sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets of Miami. Palm trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering above the houses lined neatly in rows. Inside one of these homes lived Ethan Morales, a 16-year-old boy whose heart was restless with the storms of youth. His relationship with his father, Carlos Morales, had grown sharp with arguments that seemed to erupt at the smallest spark. A missed chore, a poor grade, a difference in opinion about Ethan's future, all became fuel for quarrels that left silence in their wake. His mother, Elena, tried to calm the air, but the tension remained, heavy as the humid Florida heat. That night, Ethan sat in his room with music muffled in his headphones, staring at the glow of his phone. A message from his best friend, Sofia Ramirez, blinked on the screen. "You cannot keep fighting forever. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting." Ethan frowned, the words turning in his mind. Silence? To him, silence meant surrender, yet he felt a weariness that no defiance could ease. He looked out of the window, where the sky burned orange over Biscayne Bay, and for the first time wondered if the battles he fought at home were battles worth winning. In the kitchen below, he heard his father's footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Another argument hovered close, waiting for the chance to rise. But Ethan remained still, the thought of silence lingering like a seed planted deep within him. A change was coming, though he did not yet know what it would bring. The morning light spilled into the Morales household, yet warmth was absent. At the table, Ethan pushed his cereal around the bowl, while his father Carlos read the newspaper with a stern face. The clink of the spoon against the ceramic felt louder than words. "Homework finished?" Carlos asked without looking up. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes, Dad." His tone carried an edge, sharp enough to spark. Carlos lowered the paper and met his son's eyes. "Your future depends on discipline. If you waste these years, you will regret them for the rest of your life." The air thickened. Ethan wanted to argue, to fire back with all the frustration he had bottled up, but his chest felt heavy. Every word between them built walls, brick by brick, until the silence was more painful than shouting. Elena placed a plate of eggs on the table, her eyes darting between father and son. "Please, no fighting this morning," she said softly. But even her voice could not ease the distance stretching across the table. Ethan rose abruptly, pushing his chair back. The scrape echoed through the kitchen as he muttered, "I am not hungry." He walked away, leaving Carlos staring after him, his face caught between anger and helplessness. In his room, Ethan leaned against the door, breathing hard. He could feel the walls around him closing in, yet he realized they were not only the walls of the house, they were the walls between him and his father. Walls built on years of arguments, walls that grew taller with every word spoken in anger. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if Sofia had been right. The Florida heat lingered as the school day ended. Ethan walked across the car park, his backpack heavy, but his thoughts heavier still. Sofia Ramirez was waiting for him beneath the shade of a banyan tree, her dark hair tied back and a notebook in her arms. She had known Ethan since childhood, long enough to read the storm on his face without a word. "You fought again, didn't you?" she said gently. Ethan dropped his bag on the pavement. "It is always the same. He does not listen. He only tells me what I should do, who I should be. Every time I try to speak, it turns into another battle." Sofia sighed, her eyes steady. "You are both shouting, Ethan. No one can hear when voices rise like that. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to fight back. Just listen. Just stop feeding the fire." Ethan frowned. "So, I am supposed to let him win?" "It is not about winning or losing," Sofia replied. "It is about peace. Silence can change things. It can make him wonder. It can open a space for something new." Her words pressed against Ethan's stubborn heart. He wanted to argue, yet part of him longed for the quiet she described. A quiet that did not mean defeat but release. As they walked home, the streets of Miami glowed with the setting sun, casting golden light across the houses. Ethan glanced at Sofia, her calm presence a sharp contrast to the turmoil inside him. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to try her way. Perhaps silence could build a bridge where words had only built walls. That night, as the Morales family gathered for dinner, Ethan sat quietly, his eyes lowered to his plate. Carlos began his usual questions, his voice firm, expecting resistance. But none came. Ethan answered softly, and when his father pushed harder, Ethan did not raise his voice. The silence startled the room. It was the first crack in the pattern, small yet undeniable, and though neither father nor son realized it, a change had begun. The Morales household felt like a storm waiting to break. Every evening the same routine unfolded. Carlos came home from work, tired and stern, and Ethan moved carefully around him, wary of the sparks that often turned to fire. One night, the air grew heavier than usual. Carlos discovered Ethan's report card left on the counter. His marks had slipped, not disastrously, but enough to ignite his father's fury. Carlos held the paper in his hand, his voice sharp. "This is what you call effort? You spend more time with that phone than with your books. You are wasting your future, Ethan." Ethan froze at the doorway, his chest tightening. His instinct was to fight back, to shout that he was trying, that he was not a failure. His fists clenched as the words gathered on his tongue. Elena stepped between them, her hands raised. "Please, not again." But the house shook with tension. Ethan's voice rose, filled with anger. "Why do you never see me for who I am? Why am I never enough for you?" The words cut deeper than either expected. Carlos's face hardened, though his eyes flickered with something more fragile, something almost like pain. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Instead, he placed the report card on the table and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Ethan stood trembling, his throat raw. The silence that followed was not peace, but a void, wide and hollow. He ran to his room, slamming the door behind him, and sat on the edge of the bed with tears burning in his eyes. The breaking point had come, and for the first time Ethan realized that the battles with his father were not victories at all. They were wounds, and every argument carved the distance between them deeper. That night, staring into the darkness, Ethan thought of Sophia's words once more. Perhaps the only way forward was to stop fighting, not out of surrender, but out of strength. The morning after the argument, the Morales home was unusually still. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, yet no words passed between father and son. Carlos sat at the table with his cup, the newspaper untouched beside him. Ethan entered quietly, his eyes heavy from a sleepless night. Carlos began as always, his tone firm. "You will study this weekend. No excuses." Ethan looked at him, but did not reply. He simply nodded, pulled a slice of toast onto his plate, and sat down. The silence startled his father. Carlos expected resistance, expected sparks that would light another quarrel. Instead, he was met with calm. He frowned, uncertain, then turned his eyes back to the cup in his hands. Elena glanced between them, sensing something had shifted. For once, breakfast passed without raised voices, without slammed doors. The quiet felt strange, almost fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter it. Later that day, Ethan walked with Sophia along the edge of the Miami River. The water shimmered in the sun, and boats drifted lazily past. He told her what had happened. "I said nothing," Ethan admitted. "He wanted a fight, but I did not give him one." Sophia smiled gently. "And how did it feel?" Ethan paused. "Strange, heavy, like I was holding back a storm inside me. But for the first time, I did not feel like I had lost. I felt lighter." The words lingered in the warm Florida air. For the first time, Ethan saw that silence was not weakness. It was control, a power he had never considered before. That night, as he lay in bed, he listened to the quiet hum of crickets outside. It was not the silence of broken bonds, but the silence of something new taking root. The first step on a path he had yet to understand. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the Morales home began to change in subtle ways. Ethan no longer answered sharp remarks with sharper words. When Carlos lectured him about responsibility, Ethan listened quietly, giving no fuel to the fire. At first, Carlos grew frustrated with the lack of response. He would raise his voice, waiting for Ethan to push back, but the arguments never came. Slowly, the house began to breathe again. Elena noticed it most. She watched her son clear the dishes without being asked, his shoulders no longer stiff with defiance. She saw her husband sit at the table longer than before, as though unsure how to fill the silence left by the absence of quarrels. One evening, as the sky turned pink over Miami, Ethan and Sophia sat by the waterfront. The breeze carried the scent of the ocean, and the lights of boats shimmered on the waves. "You look calmer," Sophia said, her eyes thoughtful. Ethan shrugged. "It is not easy. Sometimes I want to shout, to prove I am right. But when I hold it in, I feel stronger. Like I am choosing peace instead of letting anger choose me." Sophia nodded. "Your father will notice, even if he does not say it." At home that night, Carlos entered Ethan's room. He glanced at his son, who was bent over his books. For a moment, he simply watched, his stern face softened by something unspoken. "You are studying," Carlos said at last. Ethan looked up and gave a small nod. "Yes." The exchange was brief, but it carried a weight that neither of them expected. The tide was shifting. A new rhythm was forming, and though unsteady, it hinted at something brighter ahead. The weeks moved forward, and the Morales household no longer trembled with daily quarrels. The silence between father and son began to feel less like a wall and more like a bridge under construction, fragile but steadying. Carlos noticed small things. Ethan rising early, without complaint. Ethan helping Elena with groceries. Ethan listening when spoken to, his temper held firm behind calm eyes. It unsettled Carlos at first, as if his son had slipped beyond his reach, but gradually, he began to see it as something else. Perhaps growth. One Saturday morning, Carlos called Ethan into the garage, where tools hung neatly on the walls and the scent of oil lingered. "Help me fix the old mower," he said. His voice carried no sharpness, only a quiet expectation. Ethan joined him, handing spanners and wiping grease from his hands. They worked side by side, the sound of metal and the smell of earth filling the space where arguments once lived. No harsh words, no slammed doors. Only silence, broken now and then by the clink of tools. Later, when the machine roared back to life, Carlos glanced at his son. A flicker of pride warmed his features. "Good work," he said simply. For Ethan, those two words rang louder than any lecture. He carried them with him as he walked to meet Sophia by the park. Beneath the wide oak trees, he told her what had happened. "He did not shout," Ethan said, his voice tinged with wonder. "He thanked me." Sophia smiled. "Sometimes silence gives space for other things to grow. Maybe he is learning from you too." The echo of change was subtle, but it was real. Each quiet moment between father and son whispered of something long buried, now rising slowly toward the light. One evening, heavy rain swept across Miami, drumming against the Morales home. The sound filled the rooms, wrapping the night in a restless rhythm. Ethan sat at his desk, books open, when a shadow crossed the doorway. It was Carlos. For a moment, father and son simply looked at each other, the rain between them like a barrier. Then Carlos stepped into the room, his hands tucked into his pockets. "When I was your age," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I did not have the freedom you do. My father worked long hours, and when he came home, there was no talking, no questions. Only rules. I thought I would do things differently. But maybe I became more like him than I realized." Ethan's chest tightened. His father rarely spoke of the past. Carlos's shadow stretched across the room, long and heavy, like the weight of history itself. "I push you because I fear you will waste what I never had," Carlos continued, his eyes fixed on the floor. "But perhaps in pushing, I forgot to see who you are becoming." The words settled deep into Ethan's heart. For years, he had imagined his father as unyielding, immovable. Yet here, in the dim glow of the lamp, stood a man carrying shadows of his own. Ethan did not speak. He simply listened, letting the silence hold the space between them. For once, silence was not armor. It was understanding. Carlos looked at his son, waiting for the usual fire, the defiance. But instead, he found calm. Ethan's steady gaze met his own, and in that moment, something shifted. The shadow was still there, but it no longer fell entirely between them. The days after that conversation carried a different tone. The silence between Ethan and Carlos was no longer cold. It had softened into something almost steady, like the quiet rhythm of waves brushing against the shore. One Saturday afternoon, Carlos surprised Ethan. He appeared at the door of his son's room holding a pair of baseball gloves, worn but cared for. "It has been years," Carlos said. "Shall we play?" Ethan blinked in disbelief, then rose slowly, a smile tugging at his lips. They walked together to the park nearby, the Florida sun breaking through scattered clouds. The field was damp from last night's rain, the grass sparkling with drops of light. They began to throw the ball, the leather cracking against the gloves, each catch carrying more than just weight. It carried memory. The laughter came quietly at first, awkward and uncertain, but soon it rang out across the empty field, echoing like it had been waiting all along. From a distance, Elena watched, her hand pressed to her chest. For so long she had prayed for this moment, for her husband and son to find one another again. Later, sitting on the bleachers, Ethan looked at his father. "It feels different now," he said softly. Carlos nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because you stopped fighting. You gave me space to see. You taught me without words." The sentence struck Ethan with quiet force. For the first time, he felt not just like a son but like someone shaping the world around him. The bridge was not just rebuilt, it was stronger than before, forged in silence and patience. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky gold, father and son walked home together. Their steps were unhurried, their shoulders almost touching. For once, the road did not feel long. The Morales home felt different now. The air that once carried tension now flowed with something gentler, something easier to breathe. The walls seemed brighter, the silence warmer. On a Sunday morning, sunlight poured through the windows as Elena prepared breakfast. The table was set, the scent of coffee mingling with fresh bread. Ethan entered, greeting his mother with a kiss on the cheek. Moments later, Carlos appeared, his expression calm, a trace of a smile on his lips. They sat together, the three of them, and for the first time in years the meal was unbroken by raised voices. Instead, conversation flowed like a river long blocked, now set free. Ethan spoke of his studies, of a project he was excited about. Carlos listened, truly listened, his eyes steady and proud. When Ethan finished, his father said quietly, "I am proud of you." The words landed like sunlight breaking through clouds. Ethan's heart swelled, not because he had won an argument, but because he had been seen. Sophia stopped by later that afternoon. She stood at the doorway, smiling as she watched Ethan joke with his parents, laughter filling the rooms where silence had once sat heavy. "You did it," she whispered when they stepped outside for a walk. Ethan shook his head. "We did it. You showed me another way." The sky above Florida was painted in shades of orange and gold, the day slowly giving itself to evening. Ethan looked back at his home, glowing in the light of the setting sun. It was no longer a house of battles, no longer a place of walls and shadows. It was a home rebuilt, filled with warmth, with laughter, with the quiet strength of love.